Hello everyone and welcome to the Wacko Prophet Podcast. My name is Imran. The Wacko Prophet Podcast is where I give my amateur but in-depth thoughts, impressions and reviews on movies, TV and web series, books and games. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the day. I started off this podcast a little over 2 months ago, and the first series that I chose to review is the YouTube Red and Netflix series Cobra Kai Season 1. And as if you've been following me since the beginning, I've been reviewing that series episode by episode. And today, we are at episode 10, the finale of Season 1, named Mercy. And what an amazing episode it is. We see a lot of great badass karate from a lot of characters, but the brunt of the weight we experience in the episode is actually emotional. So let's get right into it. Okay, as of the end of episode 9, our protagonists Johnny Lawrence and Daniel LaRusso are both at wit's end, having found out that Johnny's son Robbie has been practicing karate with Daniel without revealing his connection with Johnny. Meanwhile, Miguel, who is, for all intents and purposes, Johnny Lawrence's karate protege, the first student of the new Cobra Kai, is also undergoing an altogether bad transformation from a likable hero to more of an anti-hero, having been an absolute ass to Sam, possibly ending their relationship as of the end of episode 9. We are also at the ready to see what happens in the All Valley tournament, which is almost the entirety of this episode 10 of the finale, Mercy. Mercy is quite honestly, it's an episode that defied my expectations in a lot of ways, while also sticking to a very predictable template in certain cases. And I'll get into it, but as usual, I will not be talking about the episode beat by beat, but I will be talking about the good, the bad, and will highlight some important things as I usually do as well. So make sure that you have finished season 1 of Cobra Kai, because this is the 10th episode, the last one, the finale. So make sure that you have finished at least season 1 of Cobra Kai before you proceed. It's all right. I can wait. Okay then, let's get right into it. Cobra Kai, Season 1, Episode 10, Mercy, the finale. Let's talk about the good. Now, this episode is, as I said, pretty well done. It sums up the entire season quite nicely for the most part, but there is a certain thing that I'd like to address, which I've categorized as bad, so you will find that as well. But for the most part, I have found this episode to be very positive in terms of story, not positive in terms of what happens to the people. A lot of negative things actually end up happening, and a lot of things that change characters, which I like, which means that characters have arcs, which I enjoy. But if you have grown close to a character, or at least if I have grown close to a character, I find it painful or difficult to go through that arc with them. But this is a good thing. So it has a lot of, Mercy has a lot of good things that I quite like. So let's get into it. The good number 1. The fact that it was genuinely difficult to watch. Cobra Kai Season 1 finale does an excellent job in bringing all that drama and tension, both necessary and somewhat unnecessary in certain cases, to a head. And much like all the characters we have come to know and love in the series so far, I found myself extremely tense and at the edge of my seat, which is pretty uncharacteristic for this show for almost the entire episode. For a cheesy 80s throwback show, which is what I've been calling Cobra Kai in almost every single podcast episode, this show really got me conflicted. This particular episode, I should say, really had me in conflict with myself, particularly in that final fight in terms of who I wanted to win. This is quite different to the final fight in the Karate Kid movie, where Daniel San was clearly the good and Johnny Lawrence the bad. Now, Cobra Kai obviously knew what they were doing. The creators or the writers I should say, obviously knew what it was doing. It's actually much more interesting to watch a fight, any kind of showdown, when you have emotional investment in both sides. As good as it is to see a good guy beat a bad guy and come up and win, like it was in the first Karate Kid, the underdog winning the tournament, it is, I believe, more impactful or more interesting to watch and harder to watch if you have emotional investment in both sides. Now, having said that, there are some things that the show did to try and tip the scales of support more towards Robbie. For example, there was the conversation that Miguel had with Sam, the conversation that went awry, where Miguel once again went full asshole. And then there's the fact that Robbie is at least as likable as Miguel originally was, and was also injured, and also very much, in this case, the underdog. And the cherry on top of that little scale was Miguel's unsportsmanlike behavior in the middle of the match, despite Johnny's very late advice against it. So the creators seem to want us to want Robbie to win, or at least tip it a bit in his favor. But regardless, we still really wanted Miguel to succeed at least as well, or at least for him to get a happy ending as well. I, as an audience, could mostly, out of all the characters, relate to Miguel's mum the most. That actress's performance, she doesn't really get a lot of speaking lines in this particular episode, but her performance in that entire thing is great. And a bit sad as well. Her entire performance, almost entire performance, is given through facial expressions. She starts off genuinely excited and happy for her son, because remember, she's in the audience watching the entire tournament. So she starts off genuinely excited and happy for Miguel, for her son. But as the event goes on, and especially when it comes to the final fights or the last fights, she seems to realize, she seems to at least sense that there's a change that has happened with her son in his demeanor, in his personality, in his characteristics. And while she clearly still wants him to win, she is at the same time not so sure about what has happened to Miguel. Same can be said for the senseis. In Karate Kid, the movie, Mr. Miyagi was again the wise, good, old master. And Kreese, the sensei of Cobra Kai, was a scumbag bully. So it was ridiculously easy to draw that line in the sand and take Miyagi's side. Things are entirely different in episode 10 in Mercy. Because the entire first season of Cobra Kai was spent giving us empathy about Johnny, about his situation. So we know what he has gone through. We know the goods and the bads. And we also know Daniel's somewhat unwilling investment in Robbie as well. Because if you remember, Daniel spent a couple of episodes really investing emotionally and physically in terms of karate in Robbie. So both former rivals have an emotional connection with the match, a positive emotional connection, I should say. Because Johnny had a positive experience with Miguel and almost considers him a second son. And Daniel also has a similar relationship with Robbie. And the emotional connection is strong, particularly when it comes to Johnny, because he has a stake in Miguel winning and also in Robbie winning. I don't think he wants either of them to lose or to suffer in any way. It was essentially Johnny watching his two sons, one biological and the other almost surrogate, fight against each other. And Miguel with increasing animosity and anger that Johnny fears that he has created. It's all done incredibly well, and I absolutely hated watching it, but in a good way. So there's that. Okay, good number 2. Miguel's anger and his mom's reaction. As I mentioned previously, Miguel continued his fall from grace that he started in episode 9 in this particular episode. Now, if you remember correctly, I categorized this fall as a bad in my previous podcast episode, my review of Cobra Kai Season 1, Episode 9. I did not categorize that as a bad because it chose to go down that path. It's not because they turned Miguel bad. Realistically, I could actually see someone as impressionable as Miguel falling from grace and being angry and resentful, especially when taught to express his anger and frustration through combat, the way Cobra Kai does. But this has to take place over a reasonable amount of time in order for it to be believable, particularly when it comes to someone as well reasoned and as balanced as Miguel was shown to be. This was my main gripe with Cobra Kai taking this route. I'm happy to say that their depiction of his turning morally grey, so to speak, is done marginally better this episode. Maybe because they didn't spend so much time talking about it. They show him trying to fix things with Sam, with Miguel promising a bad ending for Robbie out of jealousy and spite, which still doesn't compute to me personally, but they leave it at that. The rest of his resentfulness and spite is shown through action, through combat. He is unforgiving and has no mercy for his opponents, just like Johnny taught him. Particularly so with Robbie, going out of his way to hurt Robbie and attack his weak spot. This is a far cry from the guy getting beat up at a Halloween dance. For some reason, Miguel's anger and descent into chaos seems more natural to me when shown in that medium, without doing it through words. Maybe the writing of the dialogue is too ham-fisted, or maybe I'm just stubborn and want him to continue to be a good person, but his fighting did a far better job than his dialogue in showing how much he has changed. I still have issues about how fast that change happened, but this episode did a better job at painting him as a new, more malicious and somewhat confused person. Also, as mentioned previously, the confusion was very much perceived by his mother as well. And I think this episode did a great job communicating the noticeable change through his mother's reactions. What makes it even better or worse is that after the match is over, after they've won, Miguel doesn't feel happy either. He feels temporarily elated and he gives a pretty, on-brand and typical speech about how it was all because of Sensei Johnny Lawrence and all that. But when he learns that Sam left halfway through the tournament and did not even stick around to see his fight, he's not too happy about that. He's not angry, but he just looks depressed and sad. So Miguel is not portrayed yet as a villain through and through. So maybe there's some hope for him still. So this is obviously some hinting towards what will happen to his character in season 2. The good number 3. Johnny's growing realization of what Cobra Kai is becoming and what he is becoming, who he is becoming, to be specific. William Zabka did an amazing job as usual, embodying the character of Johnny Lawrence. He does a good amount of speaking in the finale, but almost all of what he's feeling is communicated through his face and his eyes. You can almost see him unwillingly drawing comparisons between what's happening here and what happened when he was on the mat, facing off against Daniel all those years ago. And us viewers, at least me, myself personally, were pretty much drawing the same comparisons. You can also see the conflict in his eyes. He was probably the most conflicted character in the entire episode, where he was lost between wanting his dojo to win and wanting his son to succeed. You could almost see the self-disappointment and jealousy at Robbie's interactions with Daniel. I'm glad Cobra Kai didn't feel the need to show us a visual of what he was feeling, that they didn't show him with his son in the past or whatever, in a happy moment or something, to make it obvious to the viewer that Johnny sees Daniel as more of a father figure to Robbie than he was. I was actually expecting the show to do that, given their fondness for doing such things in the past, and they actually do something similar in a different context in this episode as well, but I'm glad that they didn't go there in this particular scene, because at least for me, the message was very subtle very subtle. The message was subtle and well received. Johnny was despairing about what he had done to his students. They were pretty violent and vindictive on the mat, particularly Hawk, even going as far as to insult Johnny openly. This was hinted at in the first half of the episode when Johnny was looking at pictures of the old All Valley tournaments and sees a picture of Chris, I believe. The dawning realization and discovery peaks with his little conversation with Miguel in the break in the final match, where Johnny advises Miguel to back off and be more sportsmanlike, and Miguel throws back his own advice of no mercy right back at him. At this point, Johnny realizes that despite his proclamations of not being Kreese, he essentially has become Kreese. maybe not in the bullying, manipulative, and almost murderous ways of his former sensei and father figure, but more or less leading their respective students down the same road of anger, arrogance, and overconfidence. So, although Cobra Kai won the tournament, Johnny doesn't feel the least bit victorious. He tries to make peace with Robbie and seems to have succeeded a little bit, and even Daniel's little jab at him did not have the antagonism that Daniel had towards him for most of the season. It was more of a knowing disappointment, so let's see how that goes. The good number 4. The outcome of the finale, the final match. Speaking of Cobra Kai winning, holy shit, they won the tournament. This was admittedly quite shocking to me. I was convinced Robbie would pull out that special kick that they foreshadowed a couple of episodes ago, and Miyagi-Do would pull in a last-second victory, but I was wrong. I was dead wrong. And I'm glad I was wrong. It would have been thoroughly disappointing and by the numbers to let that happen. Robbie did pull out that surprise special kick, but Miyagi-Do lost nonetheless. I was also convinced that the show would make Cobra Kai the outright bad guys, and Miyagi-Do the good guys, and they didn't do that either. This is still very much Cobra Kai, by name and by character. The episode even ends with a Cobra Kai-centric reveal, but they did show that despite being the winners, both Johnny and Miguel are pretty unhappy, as I mentioned previously. And despite being the losers, or actually second place, Daniel and Robbie are pretty content and happy. So maybe there's a lesson there about the importance of winning and losing and what that means to you personally. Daniel certainly communicates that lesson pretty eloquently to Robbie. I don't know whether Johnny has the capacity, although I'm sure he has the willingness to communicate anything like that to Miguel if and when the time comes, purely because of how Cobra Kai has shaped its students and indeed its current sensei. The outcome of the tournament also gave me a renewed interest in what will happen in the future of the show. In that regard, the writers and director did a good job giving us a jab, telling us to go ahead and try and binge season 2 as well. So that's it. Those are the 4 good things that I noticed. Obviously, the episode had a lot more, but these are the 4 that I wanted to talk about. So, there. Okay, the bad. I mentioned that I have only one specific bad that I'll talk about, and I'll talk about it now. The bad, number 1, and the only bad for this episode. The seemingly intentional stretch of what will happen to Miguel and Sam through the next season. So yeah, while the writers did do a great job with the little twist of Cobra Kai winning, and also with that crease reveal at the end, and by the way, when it comes to the crease reveal, that would have made me come up with about 100 questions if Netflix's terrible thumbnail placement hadn't spoiled that for me already. So unfortunately it did not work. It was not as effective as it could have been. But anyway, regardless of how well those reveals were done, I don't think they did a good job trying to do something similar with Miguel and Sam's story. They had plenty of time to let Miguel and Sam hash it out, or at least come to a specific conclusion. I'm not saying that they should be together and they should solve their differences or whatever. I'm saying give me a concrete, temporary but concrete solution as to what's happening with them. I can say that it's pretty obvious that the two of them are not a thing anymore. And that's quite alright, given the new direction that they appear to be taking Miguel's character in. But some amount of closure, I think, is required here for the audience, for me specifically, for us to understand what the trajectory of those characters' relationship is. Here, I'll give you an example. Okay, I'll give you 2 examples. I'm pretty happy with where they left Johnny's relationship with Robbie. It was by no means perfect. Not everything was resolved, but that little conversation and apology at the very end of the episode and Robbie's acceptance of that was all we needed to get that temporary but feel-good closure. Similarly, the single line spoken by Daniel to Johnny gave us closure in their rivalry. Again, if only temporary. I'll give you a third example. Yeah, the very small but important conversation that Sam had with Aisha, it wasn't long-winded at all, but it resolved that issue at least temporarily. And at the end of the season, we're like, okay, this is where this issue stands. I did not feel that level of certainty or that level of closure when it comes to how they handled the situation with Miguel and Sam. I feel that the show could have given us something similar with Miguel and Sam without leaving it up in the air. Just, it seems, for the benefit of suspense. It looks like they just wanted to drag it out so that we'll watch season 2. Now, I know the conflict here where I said it was actually a good thing when it came to other parts, when it came to the how the win will affect Cobra Kai, what will happen with Miyagi-Do now that Daniel has decided to reopen it. So those, it was a good thing in those, but it is bad here. And I'll tell you why. It's good there and it's bad here because there the writing was actually good. It made sense. But here when it comes to Miguel and Sam, I don't think enough effort was put to give it any kind of closure. It seemed quite lazy how they ended it. They were like, you know what? We'll leave it until season 2. People will be engaged. I'm just seeing how blatantly lazy that is. So yeah, that is the only bad I see. It's not that important compared to the bulk of what happened in episode 10 in the finale, but it is something that has been annoying me. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, we'll talk a bit about some important stuff. Number 1, some amazing fighting. Now, I'm not a fighting expert, so I wouldn't know. I suspect I wouldn't know a good fight if I saw it from a bad one. But the episode certainly had some pretty cool-looking fights from all dojos, especially from Cobra Kai, and the fighting style really showed their personality. I should say, the assertive, dominant, overconfident personality. So that was good. Another important thing: Daniel giving his blessings and support to Robbie. I'll admit, Robbie turning up to the tournament was something that I expected, but I predicted in the last podcast episode that he would fight under the Miyagi-Do banner. I was half right. He started off as an independent, I suppose, non-affiliated, but halfway through, Daniel saw fit to bring him under the Miyagi-Do wing, so that was cool. The moment of peace between Johnny and Robbie. I know I already mentioned it, but it's in my notes here, and it's something that I truly appreciated. Good closure, as I said previously, so I quite like that. Hawk's unraveling. That was very well telegraphed. I enjoyed it a lot. There was a bit of misdirection, I don't know if it's intentional, where I was convinced that Aisha was going to be the bully, and she's kind of not really bully, but she's kind of more confident and assertive, but Hawk is the one who is completely flying off the handle. So I want to see what they do with his character as well. Sam and Aisha finding common ground. Yes, that is also something that I talked about already, so that was quite good. Oh, and also, another important thing, the obvious hint to Sam being more involved in the karate side of things. So I assume that she's also going to be the second student that Daniel takes on, assuming that obviously Robbie will be the first student. She is the second student that Daniel takes on under Miyagi-Do, because as we found out at the end of the episode, Daniel intends on starting or restarting Miyagi-Do, so that's exciting. And the final reveal, Kreese. I don't quite know what to say about this. Johnny quite clearly said, I believe in episode 7, that Kreese is dead. Was he lying? Was that a misdirection purely for the sake of audience? Or was there something else going on? Is Kreese here just as a manifestation, a mental manifestation? Because I argued previously that Johnny realized in the middle of this episode, or at least close to the end of this episode, that he was, despite his efforts, involuntarily becoming Kreese. So is this Kreese's, or is this his mind showing him? So is it going to be like a mental ghost within quotation marks, a manifestation that only Johnny can see? His mind's Kreese? That will be interesting as long as they do it properly. When I talk about manifestations, I did talk about The Haunting of Bly Manor. That showed us manifestations of guilt quite well. So maybe this is Cobra Kai version of that. Not quite guilt, but fear. Maybe Kreese represents a father figure, but also fear in Johnny's life. I don't know. I'm just winging it at this point. Maybe Kreese isn't actually dead, and that little dialogue of Chris being dead is just a lazy attempt to throw off the audience. It worked. It absolutely worked when they said it, because I believe them. But Chris being here completely makes it incorrect. So how did Johnny not know? Was he lying to Daniel? If so, why? So there's a lot of questions there, and it is something quite interesting. If I do tackle season 2 of Cobra Kai, I will definitely talk about that if it is something big. So yeah, that is the end of Mercy. That is the end of episode 10 of season 1 of the YouTube Red and Netflix series Cobra Kai. And this has been the Wacko Prophet podcast. Now, I've done the entire season episode by episode, and you can listen to all of it completely free in any podcast platform that you choose. I've also uploaded a version of it on YouTube where you can find it in the Wacko Prophet, which is my channel. I will leave a link to that in the description of this podcast as well. So yes, that is season 1. What do I think of season 1? Now, I'll talk a bit about that. I have mentioned previously that I'm very picky. I'm very selective when it comes to what I watch in terms of fiction. I tend to over-examine what I watch in terms of movies and TV series. So I think of 2 things. Number 1, the premise of the series. What the series or the movie wants to sell to us, what they want to tell, what the story is. If the story is something that I'm interested in, something that I can emotionally invest in, I'll watch it. If it is not, I'll not watch it. Usually you can't tell whether you can emotionally invest in it, or it's very difficult to tell without really watching a couple of episodes. But you can also kind of guess by the type of actors and actresses tied, and the directors, of course, tied to the series. And you can tell it by the network that is sponsoring or producing it as well. So there's a lot of hints that you can get. So if you are interested in a premise, that's the first step. If I am interested in the premise of a series, that's the first step. Cobra Kai, it was easy. I was a 90s kid. I know that Karate Kid was in the 80s, but here in Sri Lanka, they showed it a lot in the 90s, as I mentioned previously. So it's something that I quite liked when I was younger. So Cobra Kai, a series and a continuation of the Karate Kid universe, is something that I could easily enjoy and get behind it. The second thing that really drew me in, and that usually draws me in, usually something that I judge series on, is does the series or does the movie achieve what it wants to? For Cobra Kai, that what they wanted to achieve was be a cool 80s throwback series with some really good drama, really good melodrama, I should say. So yes, I think it achieved that. I think Cobra Kai was exactly what it wanted to be. Now, obviously, it's not perfect. It's far from perfect. I would not say it's one of the best series of all time. Never. It knows its place. It knows it's very pulpy. It's very cheesy, and it knows it, and it revels in it, and I love that. So it is exactly what it planned out to be. An 80s throwback with a bit of nostalgia every now and then, some cool ass karate, and some pretty good within quotation marks melodrama. And it's easy to watch to boot, because each episode is about half an hour, and there's only 10 episodes, and all episodes are up at once on Netflix, at least now. So that's some very good marketing and very good planning there to make it easy to binge through. It's helped that the cast is perfect as well. The cast is pretty perfect for what they've been cast in. I quite like Miguel. I did complain that he was not that good, or that it was not very convincing when he suddenly became a little darker in tone. But I don't think that's his fault. He was quite good in what he did. It's just that the writing, where he became this anti-hero type character, or this grey type character within the span of one episode, within 30 minutes, is something that I couldn't believe. The actor was quite good, and he managed to convince me that he is going there by way of his fighting style in the final episode, as I just said. But other than that, it is also a challenge for a drama series to present things in half-an-hour chunks. That's one drawback of having a half-an-hour episode, where you need to tell a serious story, but you only have 30 minutes or less to say it. So they manage that quite well as well. I have my gripes with each episode and I've highlighted them at length, and you can listen to all of them, as I said, at the Wacko Prophet podcast. And in the middle of the Cobra Kai review of season 1, I also squeezed in The Haunting of Bly Manor, where I talked about the entire season of The Haunting of Bly Manor in one quite long podcast episode. So I hope you enjoyed that as well. So all in all, Cobra Kai season 1, very well done. I may come back to season 2 and review it as well, although I'm not quite gonna do it immediately. I'm a little burnt out on Cobra Kai, to be honest, so I might return to it later. I might watch it actually, but I might return to it later and review the entire second season in one go, as I did for Bly Manor. That seems more my jam. So next week, I have been hinting that I'll be doing a movie, and yes, I will be doing a movie. I have not really decided what movie to talk about yet. I've watched a ton of movies, and I'm most likely going to do a review, impressions, and discussion, of course, on a movie that came out in the early 2000s, in the noughties. So we'll see how it works. Other than that, we are still in the middle of a pandemic, so it's all still kind of slow and steady. In terms of what other fiction I'm consuming, I'm still reading Shogun. I'm a ridiculously slow reader. I quite enjoy the book. I believe I mentioned that I was reading Shogun in a previous episode. It's an amazing book, but I take my time with reading. I'm also still playing Doom Eternal, the DLC, but I've also started playing a new game on my laptop called Disco Elysium. It is not a point and click, but kind of a point and click, a role-playing game similar to a tabletop RPG. So it's quite interesting, and I'm really trying to get into it as well. I don't know if I'll have the capacity to do any kind of review or discussion on that. It's quite deep in terms of its verbiage, in terms of its language, this game. So it's something that I quite enjoy. So yes, that's all we have for today. Thank you very much for coming with me on this 2.5-month journey. It's been quite fun. I've learned a lot. I'm completely new to podcasting. This is the 11th episode of the podcast I'm doing, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. I do hope to do more. I quite enjoy talking about fiction. Fiction, I believe, is a perfect medium to talk and think about things that are pretty deep and also have some just stupid fun as well. So I'm all down for watching the stupidest, funnest Fast and the Furious movie, and also getting down with The Godfather as well. So there you have it. All right. Thank you very much for listening to my lovely, lovely, ridiculously bad voice. This has been the Wacko Prophet podcast. I am the Wacko Prophet and my name is Imran. I hope you're keeping well. It's quite difficult to remain sane, I should know, in this isolationist pandemic type situation, but let's get through it. There's a lot of fiction that we can consume, and that is the only way. Okay, have a great day, everyone.